And lo and behold, the very next day, he gives me a call from the prison saying that he was arrested in this drug bust. And I do remember having to go up to the courthouse the day or the day after, or 2 days after, to go bail him out of prison with his mother and one of his close friends.
Welcome to It Is Written Canada. Thank you for joining us. Although Matthias Barry grew up in a Caribbean Christian community, he had no real faith, and the only authentic community he resonated with came through gang initiation, violent crime, and incarceration.
Today, Matthias Barry will share his powerful story of redemption, of how God reached him in the darkest place, behind bars, and how that encounter changed everything.
Matthias, thank you so much for joining us on It Is Written Canada today.
Thank you for having me.
Matthias, you grew up in a Christian community in the Caribbean, but you didn't really have faith in your home. It wasn't being lived out. Tell us about your church experience as a young person.
Yes, so growing up as a Seventh-day Adventist, it was very interesting. We at home, we never really had much devotion, but we always went to church on Sabbath. My mom, my dad. And growing up in the church, I personally didn't really have much of an interest in church per se, and I wasn't so much so involved, but neither were my parents as well. But the experience wasn't anything that I could say that I cherished or desire, and I don't even desire my children to even have that kind of experience as well.
So you didn't do any family worship, family devotions. It was just Sabbath came around and you went to church and came back from church?
That was it.
That was it?
Yeah, we did Pathfinders as well, adventurers. I didn't really have any badges or pins, but we did do that. And we did do camping as well. So those were some good times. But the youth in the church as well too, they were more looking on the outside. And that was the thing. We would always look at the outside. There were other churches around, but the Adventists, they were very different. We never wear the jewelry. We didn't go to the movies. And so we would always look at our friends and was like, okay, well, they seem to be enjoying life. Whereas on the other hand, we were just like, all enjoyment was just at naught. That's what Adventism looked like. It was just like you were just trapped and you couldn't really do much. And so we were always looking out.
Too many rules.
Yeah.
Too many do's and don'ts, right?
There was a lot of that.
Not practicing any kind of Christian faith.
No.
Okay.
I look back at it. I do wish that, there was more education along those lines.
Were your parents on the same page with each other? Did they have a good relationship?
Yeah, so on the surface, my parents are really well. I mean, and to be honest, I was just talking to my wife about it the other day, and I was saying that I really do wish that my mom and dad had remained together, because if they had remained together, I don't think I would went down the road that I went down. But in regards to their faith in the Adventist realm, or as Adventists, I wouldn't say they were like grounded deeply understanding, the things that we believe as Adventists.
Matthias, you mentioned that the young people were always looking onto the outside to see where the freedom was, where there were no rules. Tell us about your experience in high school.
Well, I went to high school when I was at the age of 11 years old. And that's when my mom left. And when my mom left to come to Canada. And so when she left, me as a young person going into high school, I was enamored with the different things that was happening. Nothing to do with Christianity. It's just, you know, and you seeing the other young men and how they behave, you know, you kind of desire that lifestyle. And so one of the things I got into smoking marijuana at that young age. Also there was also, at that time, there was a lot of gangs that were being formed. And so I wanted to be part of a gang, which eventually ended up happening. I ended up getting initiated into one of the newer gangs that was at school. And most of the times when I'm skipping class to go smoke marijuana. I remember one time, this one principal, he was fairly new, but he was really trying to crack down on us young men. And so he caught me skipping class one day, and when he caught me, he came to me and he said, "How you doing, Matthias?" And I said, "I'm doing well," and everything like that. And then he says, "Oh, your shoelace is untied." And when so I said, "Can you tie your shoelace?" And so that was really wise and smart of him. So anyhow, I went down and tied my shoelaces, and then I had marijuana in my school shirt pocket, and it fell out. All of it fell out right in front of him. And right there and then I was like, all right, well, I'm getting expelled. And but he didn't expel me. He picked it up and he said, "Come to my office." And what he did, he said, "Here's what we're gonna do. It's either you get expelled, or what we can do, I won't report this to the principal. What I will do is I will hold this, and you will go to class, you will participate in school, you will actually make it, as someone." And at that point in time, you know, we had a pretty deep conversation. I was letting him know I want to go to Canada, I want to go see my mom. Realistically, I was just kind of being a bit emotional just so that he can have some mercy on me, but we had a very deep conversation. And from that moment on, he just had this over my head, And I just couldn't live like that. And so eventually I just ended up just dropping out of school.
The pressure was too much for
Yeah,
you.
it was too much.
Even though he was giving you a second chance.
Which I should have took.
You got into theft
Yes.
at a young age, and then you ended up on a beach.
Yes.
And got beaten up,
Yeah.
and the police got you arrested, you know,
Yeah.
and you ended up in jail with some adults. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so when we went to beach, we saw some tourists. They had some bags on the beach, and so we went and stole it. And the cops came to the beach, and the friends that I were with, they ran off, and I decided to run into the bush. They found me and they brought me back to the station, and they beat me up. Trying to get information, trying to figure out who the other guys were. And so that, as a result, sent me to jail. Now, at that time, the juvenile hall was being reconstructed, so all the juveniles would have to go to the big jail. And I can remember the very first night that we were there, you know, a correctional officer got beat up. And so that was really my introduction to prison. I can't say that I had a bad time there, but I can't say it was the greatest and most memorable experience I had in my life. And so the day that they were going to sentence or remand me, my dad shows up. And so when he shows up, I just knew that this is not going to go well. You know, the judge asked him, I can never forget Judge Tom, and the judge asked him, "So, please, Matthias," because my dad's name is Matthias as well. He says, "Matthias, can you tell me more about your son?" And so my dad went and spilled the whole beans. He said, "You know, I go to work. I don't know if he goes to school. I don't know what he does. He doesn't do well in school. I tried talking to him. He talks back. As a matter of fact, he hasn't been home. He actually ran away from home, and he just let everything go." I was distraught. And so the judge said, "Okay, thank you, Mr. Barry, for giving us that information." And the judge looked at me and he says, "Sentence 3 months, bam." And that was it. And I was 15 years old at that time. And I can never forget, when leaving the courthouse, I was literally so furious with my father that we were having an argument. I was arguing with him. He wasn't arguing with me. He was really broken. I was really frustrated with him because of all the information he gave to the judge. You know, he still came and visited me, I think it was every week, even to the point where he brought me a cake on my 16th birthday while in prison.
Matthias, how did you end up in Canada?
After I came out of prison, I was still spiraling out of control. I got initiated into another gang. My dad saw what was happening, and so as a result, one night I came home. It was a Friday night. All my bags were packed, and the next morning I'm on a plane to Canada.
So your mom was in Canada.
Yes.
What was the turning point?
My mom had a husband as well too, and so that didn't really help me in my mental state. So I was just spiraling out even more. And so when I got myself involved in more drugs and more gangs, I ended up going to jail up here as well too. And so while I was in jail, specifically West Detention Center, I can never forget, I was in there. There was a little testament and I started reading it, and there was an individual there who asked me, what am I doing? And I said, well, I'm reading the Bible. That's what you do when you're in trouble. And so, he's like, and he starts telling me all this stuff, and he's like, he's proud, he's boasting about, how many times he's been to jail, and he's happy about it. And I said to myself, I said, Lord, I don't want this. Okay, Lord, here's what. There's two things I'm looking for you. I said, one, I need to know who Jesus Christ is, because I had no idea who Jesus Christ is.
So you grew up in a Christian home and you still don't know who Jesus is.
I had no idea. And then the second question I asked was, Lord, I need to know what the Sabbath is. Because, I remember one time, I can never forget, I asked my dad, why do we go to church on Saturday?
Everyone else goes to church on Sunday, you go to church on Saturday. And it's like, why?
Why? And there was always a question, why? And so, while I was there, they normally have this thing called Bible study. And so most times I'd miss it, but this one Saturday, I actually decided, you know what, I'm going to actually attend. And at this point in time, I was already saying, okay, Lord, I don't know who Jesus Christ is, I don't know the Sabbath, but I grew up doing this, I'm going to continue doing it until you can reveal more light to me, but I'm just going to do it. And so the Saturday came, I went for the Bible study, he handed out some books. One of them was a Happiness Digest.
So that's on the
Yeah, that's on the table right here, Happiness Digest. Well, when I opened it up, the first thing it said was Malton Seventh-day Adventist Church. I looked at him, I said, hey, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. And so he looked at me and he said, okay, well, when you come out, come to church, right? I think he probably thought that, you've heard that many times, so he wasn't too enthusiastic about it. After the encounter, I went back in and I started to read this book. And I'm telling you, this book caused a significant change in my life. It left an indelible impression upon my mind. It spoke about obedience, prayer, the commandments. It really revealed who Jesus Christ is to me. And that was the very thing I was praying for. I was praying and saying, Lord, I need you to reveal who Jesus Christ is to me. So now the second question, what is the Sabbath? And so I ended up going to the court. And when I went to court, they remanded me one more time, and I thought I was getting released. There was a series of events that happened, and I thought I was getting released, but I did not. So I went back in, and while I was in the paddy wagon, I said, what are you doing to me, Lord? Why am I going back to jail? I thought you were going to release me. And at that point, all I heard in my mind was, let thy will be done. And I said, okay, Lord, let your will be done. And when I went back in, there was a little book that was, it was being tossed around. And the two chapters in that book was, what is the Sabbath and why was the Sabbath changed? And I can never forget, I looked up and I said, Lord, thank you so much. And I literally read those chapters, and the Lord revealed to me clearly what this Sabbath was. And I kid you not, literally 7 days after I read that book, I was released from prison.
Were you rooted in your faith right away? Or, leaving gangs, leaving the addictions, how did you overcome all that?
Yeah, so when I was released, at this point in time, I had a 3-month-old child. My wife now, my girlfriend then, she was praying for me. I was telling her, I still want to be with the boys. I still want to smoke. I still want to do this. But I do want to go to church at the same time. And all I literally heard in my head, the Lord said, Matthias, when you were in the streets, you lived 100%. Everything that you did was 100%. Why is it now, when it comes to living for me, you only want to do it 50%. And literally, as I heard that voice, I said, no, I can't be fake. I can't be a hypocrite. I have to be 100% for God. And I remember as clear as day, I just said, okay, Lord, I'm going to follow you. And I went the next, that week, I went to my mom. I said, Mom, can I borrow your bus pass? Because I wasn't working. I was still struggling. I said, Mom, I need your bus pass. I want to go to church. And I took her bus pass. I went to church. And when I went to church, the individual who actually gave me the steps to Christ, I saw him. And I went to him and I said, do you remember me? And he said, no, I don't remember you. I said, well, you visited me while I was in prison. And he says, I don't remember who you are, but I'm so happy that you're here. He just hugged me and he just brought me in. And from that day, I never turned back, you know, and I had very good Christian friends that really helped me throughout. You know, I used to love smoking marijuana a lot, but just having that Christian community really helped me to overcome these addictions, this lifestyle, and it really was instrumental to where I am today.
That's huge, because community for you gave you a purpose. Yes. It was like a born-again experience. Mm-hmm. You had a family, yes. a Christian family, a church family.
Yes.
And that made all the difference in the world.
Huge.
Matthias, you decided to go 100% all for Jesus and to not be going 50-50 anymore. But that must not have been easy for you.
You know, when I looked at Jessica and and looked at my little girl, Malia, I said, Lord, I'm deciding to follow you. I'm going to follow you all the way. I didn't have any education. I didn't have a job, couldn't provide. But I said, Lord, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to follow you because you said that you will provide. You said that you would take care of me. And I would remember those promises. I would go out, and now the Sabbath became a bit of an issue because the same thing I'm praying for the Lord to reveal to me now becomes an issue. Because every time I would go apply for a job, they would want me to work on Saturdays and everything like that. And it was difficult. And now one of the things I was praying for, I was saying, Lord, I need a career. Some of the church members would know that was one of the things that I was always looking for. I needed a career, and I didn't know what I wanted to do in life. But because of the Christian community that I was part of, and they understood what I was going through, they were able, through the church, I was able to find a job as a plumber. Even throughout my whole plumbing career, it was difficult because, working in construction as a plumber and coming from, a gang life, and having to deal with the abrasiveness of construction, it was difficult. But I said, Lord, if this is my lot, I will follow you, whithersoever you lead me. But I can say to this day that the Lord opened up doors that were closed and allowed me to gain a career and to be able to provide. It got to the point where it was at a point where Jessica was the one, my wife, was the one who was providing. But now I can praise the Lord. I can testify and say that the Lord has brought me to a place where I can now provide confidently, and I can now have confidence in Jesus that He will continue to provide. And He has kept me. Now I have no desires whatsoever to go back out in the world. As a matter of fact, I live my life to tell people to not, especially young people, to not go into the world, because what's out there is not worth it.
You didn't just provide. I mean, God did some great things for you.
Yes.
Started your own company.
Yes.
You're employing other people. You're CEO of your company.
Yes. My wife, she's just such a bedrock. She would always encourage and say, you should consider going on your own, But one of the things that I wanted to really go on my own so that I could actually be involved in ministry. And so a series of events happened, and the Lord was able to push me out of the company I was working in. It literally pushed me out. But long story short is that, the Lord opened up a door for me where I was able to go and start my own company. Started with only $5,000 to my name, where we have trucks on the road. We have 3 employees now. We're doing pretty good, and it also afforded me to also be involved in a lot of ministry opportunities, missionary endeavors, and so forth.
You know, Jessica's dad was a police
Oh,
officer,
yes.
and so he's seeing all of this, and he did not like you, but now
no.
you got a good relationship with him.
Yes. Where I am with her family and where I am even with my family is a big difference, you know, and honestly, it was only through the love of Christ in me why these bonds were able to make them very strong today.
Yeah. We need Jesus.
Oh, yes.
It's not an option.
No.
Right? Yeah.
I was a bit skeptical about him. I would say more afraid, because he would come to school with like these red bloodshot eyes and these big like baggy clothes. So I was like, this guy, he's kind of scary looking. But I would say he was very persistent. It took us about a year and a few months before we started actually dating. And I would say that I only accepted his invitation to date because I wanted him to stop bothering me. Malia came around in 2010, so we only had been dating for a short amount of time before I got pregnant with Malia. Because of this pregnancy, I did have to drop out of my college program. I was studying to become a law clerk, something that I really aspired to be in life. But motherhood came in and I had to drop that. And during this time, Matthias was still involved in selling drugs and trafficking drugs and doing all these other sort of things. There were times when I didn't see him for months at a time. I was still pregnant with Malia at this time, and something told me, put on CP24. I put the news on and I saw that there were 4 people who were incarcerated during a drug bust out in Collingwood. And I'm like, I really think this is him. And lo and behold, the very next day, he gives me a call from the prison saying that he was arrested in this drug bust. And at this time, I was maybe about 8 months pregnant with Malia, so just ready to pop. And I do remember having to go up to the courthouse to go bail him out of prison with his mother and one of his close friends. When he was released from incarceration, he was more interested in reading spiritual things. And there even came a point where he gave me an ultimatum. He said, it's either you come to church and actually listen and see what's going on, or our relationship was done. So because I was so in love at such a young age, I'm like, you know what? This relationship isn't done yet. I'm going to come to the Adventist church and see what was going on. And that's where we met up with a lot of different Adventist families. We would go to have Bible studies every Saturday after lunch with these families. And just seeing his involvement with these studies and the knowledge that he gained because of these studies and how serious he became with life decisions like getting a career and going back to school and getting his high school diploma at that age and that time, it showed me the progress that the Lord was having within his life. And it made me now interested in having Bible studies as well. So when Malia was born in 2010, I was the one who was solely providing for our family. I was only working at No Frills at that time, making about $10.50 an hour. So finances, they weren't the greatest, but they were there. And I also had my mother, who was and still is very supportive with my family. And then my husband now has his own company. He has his own plumbing company. So from going to having no education to now being the owner and CEO of a company is pretty big. He has that company now employed with 3 or 4 other individuals. So now he's not only working, but he's employing and helping other people.
Yeah, I'm grateful for my mom and my dad being so open and honest about everything that they went through in their life. And I know that everything they talk to me about is because they don't want me to go through the same experience they went through. And it's hard to believe that that was my dad before. And it's amazing to see the change, well, hearing the change from my dad before and seeing my dad now. It's amazing how God could work.
Jesus is literally the bedrock for any one of us. And if there's doubts, if there's concerns, or things just doesn't seem to be working, what I can say with all certainty is to hold on. You know, when Christ was talking to the disciples and when he gave them that saying, you know, and a bunch of them left, he looked at 12 and he says, will you also go? And the disciple says, to whom shall we go? And every single time the enemy comes and tries to taunt me in any way, I always look to Jesus and says, to whom else will I go? And so that's what I would say to your viewers. To whom else will you go? Jesus Christ is the only thing that you need, even though things may look rough.
Guys, I'm going to ask you to pray. Pray for our viewers. There may be someone who's saying, I want that. I want that 100%.
Yes.
Give him all. Can you pray for them right now?
Definitely. Father in heaven, we want to thank you so much for your tender loving mercies. Father, there may be someone out there who is going through similar situations or even worse. And Father, I ask now that you send angels who excel in strength to touch that person. And to send your Holy Spirit as well to Father to convict that person of righteousness. And let them know that you will take care of them. That your mighty right hand, oh dear Lord, will lift them out of that mud, the things that so easily beset them. Give them comfort, Father. So I pray that my testimony, oh God, that this episode will bring relief to those who are suffering now. Because Father, I can say that truly you have been good. So I pray, Father, for these folks now. In the name of Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen.
Matthias, thank you so much for joining us on It Is Written Canada today.
Thank you for having me.
Friends, what God did for Matthias, he can do for you. No matter where you are, when you say yes to Jesus, you will receive all power in heaven and in earth to help you overcome.
Friends, it was the book Steps to Christ that spoke to Matthias. So here's a special Steps to Christ Recovery Edition, which we would like to send to you to assist you on your journey.
Thank you to everyone who has supported It Is Written Canada through your prayers and financial gifts. And also, if you have been inspired by Matthias's story, please share it with your friends.
In order to keep this ministry on the air, we truly need your support. You can make a donation on our website. You can additionally follow us and share our content on Instagram and Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also listen to our podcasts.
Friends, if you want the kind of joy and peace only Jesus can bring, we encourage you to open the Bible daily, where you will find that Jesus himself defeated the devil with these words. It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God.